in the quiet folds of Willow Creek, where time walked slower and the breeze often carried whispers of mango trees, two girls once ruled the world with nothing more than giggles and bare feet. Anita Green and Melody Hart were as different as fire and dew, yet so deeply entangled in sisterhood that even the elders said they must have been born from the same sky. They'd sit by the roadside with roasted groundnuts, drawing dreams in the sand with twigs, and promising each other that, no matter where life took them, their bond would remain thicker than Ogbono. Anita had the kind of voice that filled a room before her feet did, loud, opinionated, and sweetly abrasive. Her dreams had no borders. She spoke of flying overseas, starting businesses, marrying a man with a bank account louder than a generator. Melody was quiet thunder, steady, observant, her silence full of meaning. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words left footprints. She wasn't drawn to fast things. Instead, she found beauty in the everyday. The rhythm of kneading dough, the aroma of fresh bread, the song of dawn before the cock crowed. They both grew up on the same dusty path, but even the clouds could see they were walking in different directions. Still, every memory they built was stitched with sincerity. One afternoon, after a particularly tough exam, they lay under the guava tree and Anita whispered, "I wasn't born to remain small, Mel. My feet itch for the city." Melody smiled and simply replied, "Some of us were born to feed souls, not chase shadows." It wasn't sarcasm, it was her truth. Her mother, a widow who had raised her with both discipline and faith, often said, "A loaf made with love feeds deeper than a feast made in bitterness." And so Melody listened, learned, and loved her place, needing more than dough, kneading purpose into her hands. When Anita finally got her big break, a scholarship to Braxton City, the capital of all things glossy, she didn't just pack her bags. She packed her pride, her perfume, and 1,000 assumptions. The whole town buzzed about it. Her mother, who sold fabrics at the corner of the main market, cried tears of joy as if she'd just been crowned queen. Church elders laid hands on her at the altar and declared blessings like rain over her head. Anita basked in it all, her heels clicking louder than the drums on Thanksgiving Sunday. The day she was to leave, Melody accompanied her to the motor park, holding back a swell of emotions that sat on her chest like a stone. Anita wore fake designer sunglasses that didn't quite fit, but her confidence made up for it. "Mel," she said as they stood beside the aging bus with the squeaky door, "promise me when I come back, I won't find you still hawking bread like some local Cinderella." The words weren't meant to sting, but they did. Melody laughed, masking the pinch in her heart, and replied, "And you promise me you won't come back broken by the city." Anita waved her hand dismissively, as though dismissing the thought itself. The bus hissed, and with one last smile, she boarded. As the vehicle rumbled down the gravel road, Melody whispered a prayer through her clenched jaw. "The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth, and even forevermore," holding tightly to Psalm 121 verse 8 like a comfort cloth. She walked home alone that evening, the sky moody with clouds. When she arrived, she didn't cry. She rolled up her sleeves and returned to the oven, the same way a soldier returns to battle, not because they enjoy the war, but because they know what they're fighting for. Time unfolded like a scroll, revealing new lines with every season. Melody's days became wrapped in flower and dawn. She began rising before even the stars fully retired, whispering prayers into the cold air, and lighting the old oven her father once built with bare hands. Her mother's joints had grown weary, and so Melody had taken up the mantle not as duty, but as devotion. She started experimenting with textures, honey-glazed buns, sugar-dusted rolls, and loaves that melted on the tongue like forgiveness. The scent of her baking floated through Willow Creek, waking children, softening hardened hearts, and calling even the laziest of husbands out of bed. With time, she rebranded their small operation, printing brown paper wrappers labeled Sunrise Loaves. On each, she scribbled short quotes, some biblical, others simply heartfelt. "You matter. You're not alone. Joy comes in the morning." Business picked up like a boat catching the wind. Townsfolk began requesting by name. Market women would whisper, "Get the one with cinnamon. That girl knows something." Her hands became her wealth. Not wealth in coins, but in respect. People began seeing her not just as the baker's daughter, but as someone building something with backbone. And yet, every night after her chores were done, she'd take out an old shoebox. Inside were letters and photographs Anita had sent over the years, glamorous shots of shopping malls, new phones, parties with people wearing high heels and higher egos. Melody would look at them and smile, not with envy, but with curiosity, as though studying a painting of someone she once knew. "The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it," she'd whisper from Proverbs 10 verse 22, then close the box and blow out the candle. It was on a harmattan morning, when the air scratched your throat and the leaves rustled like old gossip, that the sleek black car rolled into Willow Creek like a misplaced chapter. Children paused their marble games, women adjusted their wrappers, and the elders peered curiously through window slits. The car door opened with a hiss, and out stepped Anita Green, now with waist-length synthetic curls, lips painted bold red, and sunglasses large enough to shade a lie. Her heels clicked against the gravel like punctuation marks on a sentence she believed only she could write. "She's returned," the village murmured, half in awe, half in calculation. Anita didn't just walk, she glided as if the air owed her space. She passed the small shops without looking, turned her nose at the roadside bean cellar, and finally stopped when she saw Melody. Dressed in a sky-blue apron, sleeves rolled up, head tie patterned with bread loaves, Melody stood beside her new bread stand. Her eyes lit up when she saw Anita and she reached for a loaf. "Try this. It's our new honey coconut roll." Anita took one look and burst into laughter. Not the warm, shared kind, but the kind that slices like cold steel. Melody Hart. "Still selling bread?" "Girl, even Jesus fed the crowd once and moved on. You've made it your destiny." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few people laughed, unsure if they should. Melody smiled faintly, dusted the flour from her palms, and looked Anita dead in the eye. "He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away," she replied softly, quoting Luke 1 verse 53. Anita rolled her eyes, dismissed her with a scoff, and strutted away. Melody stood there, the laughter still echoing. But instead of retreating, she turned, walked into her bakery, and pulled out a fresh notebook. She wrote just 5 words on the first page. Feed them anyway. Every day. Then she tied her apron tighter and got back to kneading. The sun hadn't yet climbed past the mango trees when the buzz began to ripple across Willow Creek. There was something about the way Anita Green's car glided through the narrow streets that made even the wind hold its breath. It wasn't just that the vehicle was too sleek for their humble lanes, or that her sunglasses were too dark for a sun not yet fully risen. It was the aura she carried, like a queen returning to reclaim a throne no one else had applied for. Villagers peeked from their doorways, whispering things like, "Is that not Green's daughter?" and "She's changed, oh." And truly she had. The girl who once ran barefoot to Melody's kitchen for leftover bread now walked like one who had never known cracked heels or charcoal smoke. Her gold earrings winked at the sun, her perfume trailed like royalty, and every movement said, "I'm not one of you anymore." The return felt less like a reunion and more like a performance. She stopped briefly at her family's compound, now painted a shade too loud for the village's quiet palate, where a helper dragged her luggage inside while she scrolled her phone with practiced boredom. And when Melody approached later that day with a soft smile and a loaf wrapped in the new packaging, freshly branded with the Sunrise Loave seal, Anita barely looked up. "Bread?" she asked, nose wrinkling. "You still carry this around?" There was no malice in her voice, but no kindness either. Just the casual cruelty of someone who had forgotten what humble things once sustained her. "Try it," Melody said simply, her voice as calm as a still pond. "It's sweeter now." Anita chuckled, not taking the bread, but instead tossing her hair. "I'm watching my figure," she said. "Some of us eat to live, not the other way around." Melody didn't flinch. She placed the bread on the bench and turned back toward her stand. Behind her, Anita called out, "You know, it's almost admirable. How you make suffering look noble." Melody said nothing. But later, as she swept her bakery's floor, she remembered Ecclesiastes 7 verse 8. "Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit." The weeks that followed were a study in contrast. While Melody's days were wrapped in the rhythm of rising dough and early morning sales, Anita's presence unfolded like a scented letter, loud, glossy, and hard to ignore. She began holding court at the local lounge, a new establishment barely a year old, where she sipped imported wine and dropped phrases like, "my supplier in Lagos and next month's launch." Women flocked to her, some out of admiration, others from sheer curiosity. She wore Ankara prints cut in city styles, her nails painted in shades unknown to the village palate. And in every conversation, she left crumbs of superiority like it was perfume she expected others to inhale. "I came here just to breathe," she'd say, exhaling dramatically. "The city is stressful, but this is my detox zone." Men circled her too, mostly the idle ones with more opinions than income. They listened as she spoke of boutiques, nightclubs, and big names, nodding as if her stories granted them entry into her world. Melody watched from afar, not with bitterness, but with a quiet observation only those who've loved and been belittled can understand. One afternoon, as Melody handed out free loaves to children whose parents couldn't afford breakfast, she overheard someone say, "Melody's just too content. If Anita had her hands, she'd be baking gold." Another voice chimed in, "But gold doesn't feed the soul, does it?" The words wrapped around her like balm. She turned to see Mrs. Wren, the elderly widow who often sat in front of the church sewing clothes for orphans. "Don't worry, my child," the woman said, gripping Melody's hand. Even Joseph was mocked before Pharaoh called him. That night, Melody journaled until the candle melted into waxy tears. She didn't write about Anita. She wrote about capacity, about growth, about how a seed never explains itself to weeds. And with each word, she felt something inside her stretching, not with pain, but with purpose. The oven called to her at dawn, and she answered, knowing each loaf would speak louder than her tongue ever could. Melody's success didn't roar. It whispered, gently but persistently, like a stream carving through stone. She began incorporating more flair into her bakery. A corner was set aside for sit-down customers, with small wooden tables and fresh flowers picked from her garden. Children now came not just to buy bread, but to sit with her and listen as she read short proverbs aloud while their mothers shopped. Her cinnamon rolls became a local obsession, and she began accepting bulk orders from neighboring villages. A retired food chemist named Mr. Callum, who had relocated from the city after a stroke, began visiting her bakery often. He was quiet, hunched, and walked with a cane, but his eyes danced when he spoke of fermentation, yeast balance, and the chemistry of flour. Melody listened like a sponge, soaking up every lesson. "You have hands of gold," he told her one day, "but your heart is the real oven. That's what gives your bread soul." He offered to invest in her, no contract, no conditions, just belief. With his help, Melody replaced the aging oven with an industrial one, expanded her packaging, and rebranded the cafe's front. A wooden sign now hung over the entrance, "Sunrise Loaves Bakery and Cafe, where every morning begins with grace." The villagers couldn't believe the transformation. Even those who once laughed now lined up patiently, eager to taste what dignity baked into bread could become. Melody never gloated. She still tied her apron herself, still greeted every customer by name, still gave free bread to hungry children with the same gentle smile. When someone asked why she didn't raise prices despite the demand, she answered simply, "Some things feed more than the stomach." The Bible verse etched on her new menu board read, "Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days." Ecclesiastes 11 verse 1. And truly, Melody was finding her bread, not just in coin, but in meaning, in healing, in becoming. By the time Anita's world began to unravel, most didn't notice at first. She still walked with her head high, still wore her red lipstick like war paint. But behind closed doors, the cracks in her glossy life were widening like dried earth in Harmattan. Her boutique in Braxton City had been shut down temporarily after her business partner was arrested in a laundering investigation. Her name had been mentioned, not as a suspect, but enough to make her phone stop ringing. The supplier who once called her darling now demanded payment. Friends she once hosted in penthouses began ghosting her, and the lights in her apartment flickered from unpaid bills. She returned to Willow Creek not with the same fanfare, but with a borrowed car and silence as her only companion. This time she kept her sunglasses on longer, not for fashion, but to hide eyes swollen from tears she didn't know how to explain. She sat alone at the same lounge where she once commanded attention, now a woman shrinking in her own legend. One evening she wandered past Sunrise Loaves Bakery and Cafe. She hadn't planned to enter, but something about the light spilling through the windows pulled her in. Inside, she saw villagers laughing, children licking icing off their fingers, a young couple holding hands over a shared pastry. And there behind the counter stood Melody, apron tied, sleeves rolled, her face glowing not from makeup but from peace. Anita froze. The laughter in the room didn't stop for her presence this time. Melody saw her, walked over calmly, and offered her a cinnamon roll. Anita looked at it, then at Melody, then back at the roll. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. She bit in. And with the first taste, her shoulders sank as though a weight had slipped off. It was warm, familiar, forgiving. "It tastes like home," she whispered. Melody smiled gently. "It always did," she replied. The mornings in Willow Creek had started to change in rhythm. Where once Melody's quiet footsteps were the only sound breaking the silence before dawn, now there was the steady hum of an industrial oven, the shuffle of early customers, and the soft clink of teacups against saucers. Melody had transformed more than just her family's bakery. She had redefined the morning rituals of the town. Farmers now waited with woven hats in hand for her signature raisin loaves. Pregnant women swore her banana bread eased their cravings. Even the choirmaster, who had once belittled her, now requested catering for church programs. Yet for Melody, the heart of it all remained unchanged. Her apron was still the same sky blue one she wore before success found her, now faded slightly but still firm in the waist. She swept her shop each morning with the same reverence her mother once used when sweeping their front yard. And when she poured tea for her customers, it was never hurried. Each gesture was deliberate, as if acknowledging that every act of kindness was kneading another layer of grace into the world. Yet even in this glow, she did not forget the path she had walked. She still took her mother's hand every Sunday morning, leading her gently into the front row of the church, and still placed a warm roll in the offering basket as her tithe. Her prayers were not loud, but they were full. "Lord, let my hands continue to multiply what others overlook," she often whispered, her fingers resting on the wooden counter as if touching sacred ground. The bakery was not just a place of business. It was an altar built on resilience, and every loaf was a testimony rising golden in the oven. As Melody's cafe grew, her days filled not just with baking but with letters. Word of her success had traveled beyond Willow Creek, carried by traders, travelers, and even the occasional visiting relative from Braxton City. She began receiving invitations to food fairs, local exhibitions, and even one proposal for a partnership from a restaurant owner in Sandmere, a bustling city several towns away. But Melody, ever thoughtful, didn't jump at these offers like a child chasing butterflies. She weighed each one with the patience of a woman who knew what it cost to build something with her bare hands. Her mentor, Mr. Callum, often came by in the afternoons, sipping ginger tea and sharing wisdom from the corner table by the window. "Growth is not just in how wide your name spreads," he said one evening, "but in how deep your roots go." Melody took his words seriously. She began training two young girls, Tanya and Elsie, who had dropped out of school due to financial struggles. She didn't just teach them how to bake. She taught them how to speak gently to customers, how to handle money with honesty, how to believe in themselves, even when no one else had. "You are more than flour and sugar," she would say. "You're light wrapped in skin." The community noticed. Sunrise Loaves was no longer just a bakery. It was a second chance for many who had been overlooked like pebbles in a gold mine. One afternoon, a delivery truck from Sandmere pulled up with custom packaging supplies. Melody had agreed to one small partnership, and even that, only after meeting the supplier's team in person and praying over it with her mother. She did not build in haste. She built with intention, and her foundation remained scripture deep. "By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established," she quoted from Proverbs 24 verse 3 when asked how she grew so steadily. For Melody, bricks were not laid with cement, they were laid with character. Meanwhile, Anita's silence had become more telling than her presence once was. She no longer strolled into town in heels that kissed the pavement with arrogance. Instead, she moved like a woman trying not to be seen. Her clothes, though still stylish, hung differently on her frame, more out of necessity than flair. The sparkle in her voice had dulled, her laugh now brief and strained, as though drawn from a dry well. The lounge that once echoed her stories now greeted her with nods instead of applause. Her past followers had drifted, magnetized instead to newer distractions. At first, Anita resented it all. She'd sit alone by the creek, phone in hand, scrolling through photos of a life she no longer lived. Her boutique's closure, her partner's betrayal, the debt notices piling in her email, it all pressed on her like stones on the chest of a drowning swimmer. But pride is a strange companion. It stays even when nothing else does. Anita refused to return to Braxton City. She told herself it was temporary, that she just needed to recalibrate. Yet every day she remained in Willow Creek, the more it became clear that she had nowhere else to go. The people she had once laughed with now avoided her gaze, and those she mocked, well, they had bloomed in the spaces she had ignored. Melody, especially. One morning, unable to resist her own curiosity, Anita wandered toward the bakery. She stood across the street watching Melody hand out tea to the elderly, laughing with a young boy whose shoelaces had come undone. Anita's chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with something far more uncomfortable. Regret. The kind that sits in the throat and burns like pepper swallowed whole. She returned home that evening and wrote a message she never sent. I think I owe you more than just silence. She deleted it after a while, but the act of writing it haunted her into the night. The day Anita stepped into Sunrise Loaves again was not a grand moment. There was no music, no applause. Just the ordinary quiet of late afternoon, the kind where shadows stretch slowly and people speak in soft tones. She had dressed simply, a plain blouse, dark jeans, no makeup, and her sunglasses tucked in her purse. She hesitated by the door, uncertain whether to push it open. Inside, Melody was placing loaves on the display shelf, humming a tune too distant to recognize. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon wafted through the air like a memory. Anita finally entered, her steps slow, unsure, like someone walking barefoot over broken glass. The customers didn't turn. They were busy enjoying the comfort of pastries and warm beverages. Melody looked up, her eyes meeting Anita's. She didn't pause, didn't frown. Instead, she smiled, not with triumph, not with pity, but with a grace so quiet it made Anita want to cry. Melody walked from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel, and gently offered a roll. Still warm, she said. Anita reached out, the bread soft in her palm. She took a bite, and the flavors hit her with a force no chef could manufacture: nostalgia, innocence, remorse. Her eyes welled, and she whispered, This tastes like the kitchen from our childhood. Melody nodded slowly. Some memories rise like dough. They never really die. They just wait for the right heat to return. Anita stared at her, unable to speak. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel above or beneath Melody. She simply felt human. As she sat at the window table, nibbling the rest of the roll, her mind replayed every word she once threw at Melody like stones. Yet here she was, being fed by the very hands she once mocked. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink, echoed faintly in her spirit from Romans 12, verse 20. She didn't know if she believed in redemption yet, but in that moment, she believed in bread. It became a ritual Anita never advertised, sneaking into Sunrise Loaves in the early hours of the morning before the bakery truly awakened, always choosing the corner seat near the potted fern, where she could observe without being seen. She never arrived in her former glory, no heels, no lipstick, no sweeping handbags, just the quiet simplicity of a woman slowly removing her layers. Melody never called attention to her visits, never asked why she came or what she was running from. She merely served her a cup of lemon tea and a fresh pastry, always warm, always thoughtful, like a balm placed gently on a wound. The silence between them was neither awkward nor heavy. It was the kind that allowed space to breathe, like air let into a long-sealed room. And in that space, something began to shift, not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. Anita started watching the customers more than the menu. She watched how Melody greeted every person by name, how she bent to tie a child's sandal, how she offered an extra loaf to an elderly woman whose hand trembled as she counted coins. The little gestures, once so easy to mock, now held a weight Anita couldn't laugh away. There was a strength in them, one not fed by applause but by consistency. She found herself thinking about the girl under the guava tree, the one who used to say, "Some of us were born to feed souls." Back then, Anita had rolled her eyes. Now, those words echoed louder than any business lecture she ever sat through. The seed of remorse didn't bloom instantly, but like all things rooted in truth, it took its time, spreading quietly under the soil of her pride, nudging her gently into reflection. On a windy Thursday, the kind where leaves danced without direction and the clouds wore gray like gossip, Melody stepped out of the bakery just as Anita approached with hesitation stitched across her face. She wasn't there for tea or a roll that day. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her blouse, and her eyes darted like someone preparing for a confession. "I've been thinking," she started, then paused as if waiting for permission. Melody nodded, not to encourage words, but to calm the storm she sensed beneath them. "Back then, when I laughed at you," Anita continued, "I thought I was seeing the future. I thought success had a sound, clapping, doors opening, people turning their heads. But now I see it's quieter than I imagined. It smells like flour and sounds like the names of people you remember." Melody listened without interruption, her hands folded at her front like someone waiting for the kettle to boil. Anita went on, each word more fragile than the last. "I wanted so badly to become someone that I forgot who I was. And in doing that, I tried to shame the one person who never stopped being real." There were no tears, but her voice broke slightly, like glass under strain. Melody finally stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It's not shame that makes us fall," she said softly. "It's pride that keeps us from rising again." Anita blinked, absorbing those words as if they were scripture, and in many ways they were. No one clapped, no crowd cheered. But in that quiet corner where bread had once been mocked, healing was finally kneaded into their story. Anita left that day not lighter, but freer, as if she had been carrying a bag of rocks she didn't know how to put down until someone showed her it was okay to drop it. The weeks that followed unfolded like chapters in a story neither of them planned but both had unknowingly been writing. Anita, still unsure of what her next move would be, began volunteering her time at the bakery. Not for pay, she didn't ask and Melody didn't offer, but to learn, to understand, to reconnect with the part of herself that had been buried beneath ambition and appearances. She cleaned tables, helped Tanya with inventory, learned the names of regulars, and occasionally took notes from Mr. Callum, whose quiet delight at her presence never showed as glee, but as longer conversations and deeper advice. She even began experimenting with her own recipes, testing out a pineapple and ginger pastry that Melody encouraged her to name. "Let it be yours," she'd said. "Let this be something that speaks your name in the right way this time." Anita called it Second Rise. The name stuck. It wasn't long before customers began asking for it. And with each request, Anita felt a piece of herself returning. Not the old self she had tried to sell in city boutiques, but a new one, mended, sincere, stripped of illusion. Her nights became quieter, too. She stopped checking social media obsessively, stopped measuring her worth against filtered photos and meaningless milestones. Instead, she read, she journaled. She cooked for her mother again. And one night, as she folded a batch of parchment bags for the cafe's next day, her eyes settled on a scripture Melody had written on a slip of paper above the bakery sink. "Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit." Psalm 51, verse 12. She didn't say it aloud, but she held it in her chest like a key she hadn't known she was missing. When the town announced the annual harvest celebration was to be hosted at the newly renovated Willow Creek Hall, it was Melody who was asked to cater the event, a request no one questioned. Her name had become synonymous with trust. On the morning of the celebration, the sun rose bright and unbothered, casting a golden hue on the bakery as trays of pastries and warm bread were loaded into carts. Anita was there, dressed in a simple cream dress, flour streaking her cheek, laughing as she arranged boxes labeled Sunrise Loaves and Second Rise. They arrived at the hall just as the brass band began warming up. Inside, the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and freshly brewed coffee wrapped around the crowd like a warm hug. Melody stood near the entrance, graciously greeting guests, while Anita moved through the hall serving slices of cake and tiny loaves wrapped in ribbons. The mayor stood to speak later that afternoon, commending the bakery not just for its food, but for what it represented, a symbol of transformation, of second chances, of something sacred growing in the most ordinary of places. Anita stood at the back, clapping gently, her eyes on Melody. She had spent so long chasing applause that she hadn't known how beautiful it could be to clap for someone else. That night, after the event had ended and the bakery was quiet again, Anita stood beside Melody outside, watching the stars blink above them like curious eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Melody smiled. "For what?" Anita paused, her voice tender. "For not returning what I gave. You gave me bread. I gave you stones." Melody's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "You just needed something real to be hungry for." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, the night cool but comforting. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt full. Sometimes the people we laugh at today are the very ones we'll need tomorrow. Life has a way of humbling the proud and exalting the lowly, not out of spite, but to remind us that character outlasts charisma and consistency outweighs clout. In this story, Anita chased the spotlight, mocked her friend for walking a slower path, and ended up lost in the very shadows she thought she had outrun. Melody, on the other hand, chose dignity over display, purpose over popularity, and stayed rooted when others ran. Not everyone will understand your quiet journey. Some will laugh, belittle, or dismiss your efforts simply because they don't see fast results or grand applause. But remember, bread takes time to rise. Seeds don't bloom overnight. The work you're doing in silence may one day become someone else's saving grace. If you're someone like Melody, serving, building, growing silently, don't let mockery make you bitter. Keep going, keep giving, keep needing your purpose. And if you've been like Anita, looking down on others because you thought their path was beneath you, this is your moment to self-reflect. Redemption is still possible, but only when pride is dropped at the door. In this life, never be too quick to measure people by their season. Today's bread seller might be tomorrow's silent builder of empires. And the person you overlook today may one day offer you the very warmth you desperately need.